And something of an instruction for all of you who care about the Democrats winning in the midterms next year. I want to share with you a lesson in resistance history from the rise of the Republic, about when a radical group of Congress members seized their chance to actually do something, to not just perform it, to transform the country and create something new, a democracy. Hey folks, I'm Tad Sturmer. I'm an American scholar of resistance history at the University of Southern Denmark and the author of A Resistance History of the United States. The radical Republicans might be the most important resistance story most Americans never hear. Someone on my team, though, didn't want me to focus on them because he argued that they weren't resistance, not in thorough sense, the sense that I use. But they were. They were insurgents who had no business holding power in the First Republic. And when the Civil War cracked that system open, they climbed inside. But they had only a brief window and they knew it. That's why their story belongs in resistance history. They show what it means to seize a moment when abusive authority is knocked off its pillar and to drive the stake as deep as you can before it gets back up. And the numbers illustrate the point. Okay, in the 36th Congress at the beginning of the Civil War in 1860, the House had 238 seats. Republicans had 116 of them. The Democrats, mostly from the southern enslaver states, had 83, and the rest are scattered among other parties. The radical Republicans, those folks had been arguing for structural change to end slavery. They were just a minority faction inside the Republican caucus. Thaddeus Stevens, people like that, were tolerated, but on the margins. They could give speeches, but no one had to listen to them. And Lincoln wanted nothing to do with them, which was okay for them because they hated him too. His priority was reunion, not equality. Then, and this is crucial, the war broke the Republic. The Constitution as the framers built it, with its balance of sections, its 3/5 clause, the practical dependence on continued compromise between free and enslaved slaver states, stopped functioning. 11 states were gone, their seats empty. Quorum requirements, supermajorities, even the normal arithmetic of passing amendments all shifted under the pressure of the war. The very structure of the First Republic was suspended. That's the only reason the radicals could act at all. Under the framers' design, they never would have had the votes. With the South locked out, they suddenly did. They knew they were governing in a constitutional blind spot, though. A republic cracked open, its rules bent by necessity. And Congress made those bends explicit. When the 13th and 14th Amendments were proposed, the 2/3 requirement was calculated only from the sitting members. But that's not what the Constitution says. Article 5, take a look. 2/3 of both houses, not 2/3 of both houses present. That was how the radicals could marshal the votes to amend the Constitution. They bent the rules. Under the terms of the enslavers' republic, they never would have cleared the bar. Never. The war suspended those rules, and the radicals understood that suspension as their only chance. And they made the suspension binding. For the first time in American history, ratification itself was made a condition of representation. Every ex-Confederate state had to ratify the 14th Amendment before reclaiming its seats in Congress. And later, the 4 holdout states, Virginia, Mississippi, Texas, and Georgia, they had to ratify the 15th Amendment to come back. No other amendments in American history were passed that way, with the lower threshold for adoption by Congress and ratification turned into the price of readmission. That is how the most important constitutional changes in U.S. history were secured, not by the rules of the First Republic, but because the radicals broke them. For those of you interested in amending the Constitution, keep that in mind. And they went on breaking those rules. When Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was the radicals' first try at establishing citizenship for black people, Johnson declared that black people didn't deserve citizenship and it discriminated against the white race, his words. The House radicals forced an override, the first time in American history that Congress had broken a president's veto on a major law. But radicals knew legislation was fragile. It can be repealed or overridden by the next Congress. Easy. The pendulum swings back, they keep saying. That's why John Bingham drafted the 14th Amendment, to lock all that down. They weren't playing. Birthright citizenship, equal protection, due process. For the first time stating that equality before the law, regardless of race, is a fundamental right of all American citizens. And they tied it to power, taking advantage of the broken republic. No southern state could reclaim its seats without ratifying it. That was resistance inside the system, made possible only by the lockout of their enemies. Johnson, of course, he fought back, bastard. He even campaigned in the former Confederate states against the 14th Amendment. One violation of the Tenure of Office Act later, and the House impeached him. Thaddeus Stevens was carried into the chamber in his final days to cast his vote, but the Senate, the bastards, fell short by 1. But impeachment itself showed the refusal of abusive authority. The radicals would use every weapon to keep the abusive order from reconstituting itself, to keep it from getting back up. But they knew the clock was running. White supremacist violence surged in the South. The white nationalists were coming back. The courts began to narrow the victories brought by the war, shutting down any access by black men to the political process. Even the radical Reconstruction move was necessary by the radicals to ensure that the reconstruction of the republic would be on their terms. Because moderates and conservatives, they wanted to reconcile. Can't we all just get along? Haven't you had enough of conflicts? The radicals said, hell no. 80 years of slavery, 700,000 dead in the Civil War, that had all better mean something. So they forced the 15th Amendment, a shield, their last grasp for structural change. Without clear constitutional protections of voting rights for black men, every other gain, emancipation, civil rights, citizenship, would collapse as soon as the South was reseated. And they were going to be reseated. So the radicals bent the structure again to make it happen. In 1869, Congress proposed the amendment knowing it would never pass once the Southern members were back. So they tied ratification to readmission again. Southern states still under military reconstruction could not reclaim their seats without first ratifying the 15th Amendment. And that maneuver turned the mechanics of the rebellion against the old regime. If they wanted back in, it would have to accept the amendment that would, in theory, arm black citizens with the vote. Fine, don't want to do that? Then you don't get their full representation. It was the last structural shield the radicals could force through before the door closed. And it closed hard. By July 1870, every ex-Confederate state was back in Congress. By the 44th Congress in 1875, only 14 years after the war began, the House had grown to 293 seats, but the Democrats had swung into a huge majority, 182 seats, almost 100 more than it had 14 years before. To add insult, the Southern delegations came back even stronger because of the apportionment that fully counted freed black people even as they were violently excluded from political life. In just 14 years, the abusive order of the First Republic was back, and maybe worse than ever. So the radicals' window had slammed shut. They'd really had only about 5 years, 1865 or about 1870. That's the story. The radical Republicans had no business in power under the republic the framers built. They only mattered because the war that John Brown started had broke it. With the South locked out, the Constitution bent under necessity, and resistance slipped right inside. And they knew the opening was brief, so they hammered through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments while they could. Don't like the process? Too bad. You should have won the war. And then it was over. That's why they belong in a resistance history of the United States. That's a lesson from the rise of the Republic. And they showed the principle. When abusive authority is destabilized, you seize the rupture. You drive the stake as deep as you can, because the window always closes, and you never get that chance twice. Should have happened after January 6, 2021. So what's the plan for January 2027? Ghosts of the radical Republicans would like a word.
Remember, in the end, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Come! What time?